Welcome to the Cyber Center for Biblical Studies. Hi, my name is Herb Bateman. Today we want to look at a commentary on the book of Philippians in the Mentor Commentary series written by Matt Harmon. Now Matt is a professor of New Testament at Grace Theological Seminary, and he's here to introduce us to his commentary. Matt, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. And as I think about the book of Philippians, it's one of my favorite. It was one of the first books I studied when I got saved way back in 1978. And it really was the book that spurred me to go on and study and take some additional courses in Bible at the time, Philadelphia College of the Bible, which is now Cairn University. But let's talk a little bit about Philippians, this commentary. And kind of explain to me how your commentary unfolds. How do you approach writing this commentary and presenting the material?
Sure. Well, in many respects, the commentary is reasonably traditional in how it's put together. I have a lengthy introduction of probably maybe 40 pages or so that tries to cover the basic information of authorship, date, recipients, what was going on in the church at Philippi, what was going on with the Apostle Paul, and also attempts to address at some level maybe some of the critical challenges that have been raised against the unity of the book of Philippians, as well as address its structure and some of the key themes. And because I have a special interest in how the New Testament authors use the Old Testament, I have a little excursus in there on Paul's use of the Old Testament at a more sort of subtle level in Philippians, and with special reference to the Christ hymn in chapter 2 and how the Old Testament has informed the way he has put that together in the way that he talks about it.
Okay. Now, as you wrote this, how does the book of Philippians unfold as you see the book of Philippians unfolding in your commentary? Where do you see that unfolding taking place in the book?
Sure. I see three main sections to the text of Philippians. I see the first opening section from chapter 1, verse 1 through verse 26, where Paul greets the Philippians and then updates them on his circumstances. Then I think there's a major transition at verse 27 of chapter 1 that starts the letter body, and then that extends, in my view, all the way through chapter 4, verse 3, and scholars will debate where to end that main section. But that central section, I think, really focuses on how should Christians live as citizens of God's kingdom in a fallen world. And so I think Paul emphasizes that it's to be done joyfully, it's to be done in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. And so in addition to giving us the ultimate picture of that in the person of Jesus, he then gives several examples of Timothy and Epaphroditus and his own example of what it looks like to live as a citizen in God's kingdom, shaped by Christ himself and what that looks like. Because I think he knew very clearly that not only do we need direct instruction, we often need models so we can see what does that actually look like in different people's lives. And then the last section starts in chapter 4, verse 4, and goes to the end of the letter where Paul gives some concluding exhortations and then thanks the Philippians for their financial partnership with him in gospel ministry.
Very nice. How does your commentary compare with others? I mean, there are so many out there.
Sure.
How might you describe your commentary in light of Word Biblical, Pillar,
right.
Some of those other series?
Well, I think in terms of comparison with other series, this particular commentary is comparable to probably the level of about a Pillar New Testament commentary. I try to, in the main body of the text, stick to following the flow and the meaning and the significance and all of that in light of the whole canon. So I'd really try to keep the main body of the commentary moving and not bog the reader down in critical debates or even finer details of Greek grammar and that sort of thing. But I do that in the footnotes. And so that's my attempt to try to serve a broad audience of people. So it's not just the Greek student who knows their language as well who can use it, but it's also someone who maybe hasn't had any language training and yet wants to follow the flow of thought and understand the meaning and the significance. So even in the introduction, I tell readers, you have my blessing to skip a footnote if you have no idea what it's about. That's fine. If you don't understand it, then it wasn't intended for you. So as I sat down to write, I had in mind pastors, Bible study leaders, the missionary on the field, Sunday school teachers. I wanted to try to make it usable for a wide range of audience because I think Philippians has so much to say to us today in the church. And I wanted to make sure that as many people as possible could benefit from understanding what Paul wrote to the Philippians and how that has meaning and significance for us today as Christians in the 21st century.
Cool. Very good. What do you consider to be, and in some ways I think you've already answered this, but what do you consider to be the most helpful aspect of the commentary? Is it because you address a broad audience? Would you say that's an aspect of that, or?
That's certainly a part of it. There's one particular feature, though, that I think is unique, is at the end of every passage. So I've broken the body of the commentary down into essentially smaller units of passages, and then I go verse by verse through that. But at the end, I have a section called Suggestions for Preaching and Teaching, where I give a suggested, and again, it's just a suggestion. This is kind of, if I were to preach this is a main point this is the overarching point I would try to emphasize, and then here's some sort of suggested sermon outline. And then I kind of walk through a couple paragraphs of explaining why I think that's the way to go, or why I would choose to go that way. Some of the maybe direct issues of application that it addresses. And I remember when I did that I sent it off to a pastor friend of mine for some feedback. And I sent it off to a number of people before I sent it to the publisher. But there was one pastor friend in particular who looked at that and said, "You're doing too much work for the pastor." And I said, well, that may be true. But I said, I think most people who use the commentary are going to be able to look at it and say, I think this is helpful, and I don't think this part is particularly helpful, so I'm going to go a different direction. So I'm trusting that the reader, that the pastor, that the Sunday school teacher can look at that and get what's helpful and go their own direction if they say, I see it maybe a little bit differently. I certainly don't in any way pretend to have the last word on Philippians or even how an individual passage should be preached, but I just wanted to put that in as a service to those who faithfully preach and teach God's Word as maybe a helpful suggestion to kind of prime their thinking a little bit.
That's great. I think we all need that occasionally. You
Sure.
read through something and you look at this and, wow, I wonder how I can approach that. And that might trigger an idea. So that's a good aspect of it. That's a good.
Yeah.
Well, good. Let me ask, as authors, we're asked to write a project or write a book, or we volunteer to write a book, and publishers have limitations, page limitations. And so you probably wish you could have included one or two things in addition to what you wrote. There was something that you may have left out.
Sure.
What might those things be? If a publisher were to have given you free reign and unlimited pages, what might you have wished to have been able to include?
Sure. Well, first I do want to say that the publisher was very gracious and generous with me in allowing me a lot of freedom to do this commentary the way that I wanted to do it. And so anything that I say in terms of I wish I could have done this, I don't want in any way to reflect on the publisher. But if I had more time and word count and space, I probably would have done a little bit more in just looking into the Christ hymn in chapter 2, verses 6 through 11 in particular, and some of the scholarship that surrounds that. That's one of those areas where you can get lost. There's so much that's been done with that. And that was one of the more painful aspects, was just having to say, I only have so much time and so much space, and thinking what is most helpful to the pastor, to the missionary, to the Sunday school teacher in terms of what's out there in scholarship, to try to sort of sift through that and show maybe what's the most useful. But there were plenty of rabbit trails I would have loved to have gone on with that, but just didn't have the time or the space to do it.
Well, I tell you, just by what you're telling me, the way that this is an exposition with some critical notes, that for the pastor who wants to delve in a little more deeply, I'm sure there are notes in there that might point.
There are. Absolutely. That when you dig into the footnotes, you'll find articles or monographs or books that for someone who wants to start going down that road, I can get you a little ways down the road, at least in terms of some key studies and things that you should be looking at and thinking about. And so in one sense, that's where it's also serving the student, so the student at a Bible college or even seminary level who is doing further work on one of those passages. They can at least get a sense of, okay, these are some of the key foundational studies. Here's some recent work that's been done that might help me go a little bit deeper.
Well, good. And the idea of putting some suggestions just really lends itself to a nice commentary for a pastor. Well, okay, so so here I am. I'm a pastor, and I'm thinking to myself, it's been a while since I've preached on Philippians. Let me think through where I might put it in my preaching schedule, and I want to start collecting some sources. I'm going to begin with this commentary written by you. What might be some other sources you might recommend to a pastor who is probing the possibility of preaching Philippians maybe in January and February of next year?
Sure. Well, I would suggest that probably one of the most significant commentaries on Philippians was by Peter O'Brien in the New International Greek Testament Commentary series. Now, you can tell by the title of the series, though, that that's going to be more on the technical end. And so if a pastor is a little rusty on their Greek, they might struggle at points with some of the sections in there. But it's an outstanding commentary. Now it's, though, probably 25, 30 years old. And that doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that it doesn't account for any sort of recent scholarship that's been done on Philippians. Another recommendation, though, maybe the next step down in terms of technicality, but still very useful, would be Gordon Fee in the NICNT series. Gordon Fee is always worth reading and looking at and interacting with. Even when you disagree with him, he will often help you understand the issues and what's at stake very nicely. One commentary, though, that evangelicals, I think, might miss, just because it's not in some of the more, in one of those kind of key series that people often go to, is one by Marcus Bachmuel in the Black's New Testament Commentary. It's a shorter commentary, and yet it is rich and substantive, and he is a very gifted writer. And so he has very succinct and clever ways of summing things up that can be very usable in preaching and teaching, where you think that one sentence just nails it. Yeah. And so that would be a place that I would consider having them look. And of course, outside of traditional commentaries, there are some other resources out there. I know that the exegetical guide on Philippians in the series that you edit would be a great place for students and pastors to consult with. And then in addition to that, there's the volume in the Baylor Handbook on the New Testament series coming out soon by William Varner. And those are just great resources to be able to try to refresh or keep your language skills up to speed or improve them, because inevitably, in the hustle and bustle of pastoral ministry, it can be challenging to stay fresh with that. But tools like that are a good way to kind of do a little bit of your own work and then kind of check it against scholars who've really invested the time to help you understand the nuances of the text.
Very good. Well, Matt, thank you so very much for joining us, and thank you for the added plus concerning Will Varner's work coming out in the Baylor series, and promoting Tom Moore's project on translating Philippians clause by clause. I appreciate that.
Glad to do it.
And thank you for joining us. And perhaps this interview with Matt and this new commentary that has come out recently might give you cause to pick up the commentary and think through and perhaps preach on the book of Philippians, a very rich book, very pertinent for today, for today's believers. In the meantime, I trust you will have a great day and that you will walk with our King and be a blessing. Thank you.